Hi there, welcome and thank you for joining us today for this NPMS webinar on botanical photography for beginners with Leif Bersweden. So for those I haven't met or spoken to yet, I'm Rachel Murphy. I'm the volunteer manager for the NPMS, and this is part of the National Plant Monitoring Scheme's training mini-series this winter. So welcome to anyone already surveying with us. And also, of course, to anybody who is new to the scheme or even perhaps interested in becoming a volunteer with us. You can find more about the scheme and how to get involved on our website. I just popped the link in the chat there for you, npms.org.uk. And on there you can find out all about how we have hundreds of volunteers up and down the country helping us to monitor the health of our habitats. And you can also find actually a whole raft of further training materials and resources. So just a few little housekeeping things that I have to say, I'm afraid. Please be aware that because this is a webinar, I'm afraid we can't see or hear you. But if you would like to ask a question, which of course we very much encourage, please use the Q&A function found in the Zoom menu. I know that Leif has been brilliant and he's built in some time within the session to answer any questions, which I'll be monitoring and posing to him. So do feel free to use this opportunity while we have Leif here right in front of us. We've got him. So use this opportunity to pose those queries and pick up some great tips. And all that remains for me to say is a big welcome to you, Leif, and thank you very much for providing the session. I'm sure many of you will already be familiar with Leif, whether through any of his lovely and very popular books he's written about Britain's wild plants, or perhaps a plant ID course that he's run through the Species Recovery Trust, or even perhaps through his growing social media presence and his work with Wildflower Hour and BSBI. So I shall hand over to you, Leif.
Brilliant. Thank you, Rachel. That was wonderful. Well, welcome everyone. Thank you so much for coming and giving up your Monday lunchtime to hear me talk about how to take photos of plants. Yeah, basically, I hope this is useful. I've just tried to collate all the things which I've learned about what makes a good photograph into this talk. So yeah, I hope it proves useful. So yes, just by way of introduction, a little bit on me, very briefly. As Rachel said, my name's Leif. I'm a botanist and spend my entire life trying to convince as many people as I possibly can that plants are amazing and completely just entirely worth our time and attention. And I do this in various ways. I use social media to, I take photos of plants and I use social media to try to tell stories about those plants, particularly Instagram, but Twitter as well. And yeah, as Rachel mentioned as well, I write books for the general public to try and get people enthused about plants. So the latest of those is Where the Wildflowers Grow, which is just an extension of my Instagram. Effectively, it's just taking those plants and writing about them just with slightly fewer images. So this course is all about just capturing botanical diversity, which is a huge part of the way we enjoy plants, and in hand it's a way we help preserve them as well, because obviously if you can take nice images that people think, oh wow, that's an amazing thing, they're much more likely to care about the plant and help protect it. So I personally am not an expert, which is, I'm sure, exactly what you wanted to hear when you signed on to this webinar, but I'm really not. I have never had any photography lessons or done any sort of training. Everything that I know and have learned has been through trial and error. I've been doing this I've been taking photos of plants for the best part of 20 years now. And so this is sort of my experience and what I've found has worked and what I found doesn't work. So feel free to disagree. These are sort of my opinions on what works. It hasn't come through any sort of formal training. And so this webinar, in order to maximize sort of getting out what I know, but also to make it as relatable as possible and as accessible as possible, is entirely about plant photography using your phone. Because obviously most people have phones, pretty much all phones these days have cameras. So It's just, yeah, to make it most accessible. That's what we're going to be talking about. To be honest, most photos I take of plants these days are actually with my phone. I do have a digital camera as well, but predominantly these days I do actually just use my phone. It's so much easier to carry around and take photos with. And so, yeah, all the photos that are in this talk are taken on my phone, which is an iPhone 11. But yeah, so they're all taken with a phone, including this filmy fern here. So to just give you a little overview of what I'm going to be talking about, I'm going to start by talking about the foreground of photos. So this is basically the plant that you're trying to take a photo of. So talking about things like adjusting the lighting and getting everything really nicely lit, and then actually focusing on the plant that you've got. I'm then going to talk about the background of the image and getting it so that it really emphasizes the foreground, but also how you can use the background to add to the story that you're trying to tell. I'm then going to talk about image composition, and this is something in which, of course, is, you know, whether you're using a digital camera or a phone, this is applicable. So just how to bring the foreground and the background together and to frame your image in the best way. I'm going to talk a little bit about macro photography, and you're using an extra lens just to clip onto your phone or a hand lens to get closer up photos of different bits of plants. I'm also going to talk a bit about which parts of the plants it's most useful to photograph. So, you know, if it's a tree, in this case, you want the whole tree, the twigs, the buds, the bark. So I've got a little checklist of things to be aware of that you might want photos of when trying to get a plant identified. And then finally, just a little bit, which is mostly just common sense, but a bit about good practice when taking your photos. And as Rachel said, between each of these sections, I've got a little pause where I can answer questions on that previous bit. So yeah, as she said, if you do have any questions as I'm talking, just pop them in the Q&A, and she can quiz me at each of these sections. Nice. Well, yeah, so let's begin. I hope it's useful. So yeah, so I'm going to start by talking about getting the foreground right. So getting the lighting all nice and then actually focusing on the plant in front of you. So obviously plants don't move very quickly. It's one of the best things about taking photos of them. You can kind of sit there for ages getting the photo right. It doesn't run away or fly away from you. But obviously the light does move. And so it's important to think about, you know, before you've even started, is to think about where the sun is. And this applies even when it's cloudy. It's just really useful to know where the sun is so you can position it, you know, between or position yourself relative to the sun and the plant. It's not always about direct sunlight though. So actually overcast skies are often some of the best conditions to take photos of plants in, because they provide this really soft light that doesn't have any of these harsh shadows or big contrasts in colors. So actually you often get a much nicer photo of a plant when it's a cloudy day rather than a very sunny day. But if it is a sunny day, then the best time of day to go out to take photos is sort of what's colloquially known as golden hour. So like an hour at the beginning of the day or an hour at the end of the day, where the sun is lower in the sky and the light is coming in at an angle rather than directly onto the plant. And you'll often get a much more accurate representation of colors. You won't get really strong contrasting sort of shadows and things like you might get in the middle of the day. So a few little tips on the lighting. So as I said, it's really important to know where the sun is. And this applies whether it's cloudy or blue skies. And you've got two images here of these orchids. And this plant on the left here, the sun is behind the plant. And as you can see, that main petal, you can't really pick out the details particularly well. But as soon as you turn around, and so the sun is now behind you, behind the camera, pointing towards the plant, then you can immediately pick out much more of the details on those petals. It's subtle in this case, but often it can be a really, really distinct difference. That isn't always the case, though. It is generally best to have the sun behind you while taking a photo, but in a few cases, it actually works really nicely to have the sun behind the plant. So this is just one example. The photo on the left, it's a nice photo with showing a really nice undulating edge of this oak leaf. And this is with the sun behind me and behind the camera. But then I just swiveled around and suddenly that sun was backlighting this leaf, and you can see all these amazing veins in the leaf and that sort of mottling color on the autumn leaf. So it can sometimes be beneficial just to turn around and see what it's like the other way around as well. And this gets, it can be a very obvious difference like this, but sometimes the difference is extremely subtle. And this is, me being a complete perfectionist, but I will often spend ages just stood there sort of spinning around a plant trying to find the best image. But yeah, if you take this image on the left here of this moss, you can see the sun in the distance behind those hills, and it produces a perfectly fine photograph. When I then swiveled 45 degrees and took a photo in the middle here, it's again, this difference is very subtle and what doesn't matter for most things, but if you, like me, are a complete perfectionist, it might make a difference. But you can see the light on that moss, and I hope you can see this on your screens, is very subtly just a slightly cooler color, and you can pick out slightly more of the detail on those sort of the heads of that moss. Then what I did was rather than holding it up, I then went down. So I had the ground as the background. So this one on this photo on the right here is just so much warmer. Suddenly that light was much more accurate, sort of to what I had in front of me. And so this is the photo I ended up using because it most accurately represented the light that I could actually see in front of me while I had this moss. So again, it's subtle, but it can make a difference. Something that isn't so subtle though is shadows. So a big no-no when it comes to botanical photography, in my opinion, is having your plant in shadow in the foreground and then a really sunny background. So as you can see on this photo on the left, you can barely see any of the color in this bee orchid in the foreground. You can barely see any detail. And actually, as a viewer, your eye is immediately drawn to the background, which is nice and sunny. Whereas if you just make sure that you get the plant in the sun and the background in the sun, as you can see on the right here, then suddenly you get that color, you get that detail, and it just makes a much nicer photo. It might seem like stating the obvious, but yeah, you can just kind of experiment with that as well. Now, I'm aware this is a botanical photography thing, and I've got a photo of a mushroom here, but it is the one non-plant in this talk. But all of this applies to things like, just general photography, really. But obviously, fungi can be photographed in the same way. But this is a little bit about improving the lighting when you are forced to look at the sun, for example. So here, the only angle I could take a photo here was with the sun in the background, and up on the right, you can see this photo, which is very dark underneath. You can kind of see the light passing through the top of the mushroom there, but there isn't much detail. But just by using a torch, I was able to capture the gills, which again, I hope you can see, but I was able to capture the details of those gills on the mushroom just by using a phone torch in this case, just to shine that torch up underneath the mushroom, and it just sort of counteracts that sunlight coming in from behind. It's important, unless you absolutely have to not use the flash, because the flash produces these really strong contrasting areas of shadow and light, so just sort of slightly ruins the photo. So unless you absolutely have to, like, I don't know, you're in a cave and it's really, really dark, and you don't have a torch or anyone else with a phone with you, it generally is best not to use the flash. If you do have a torch or a phone torch, then the best way to do it is position it to the side or just below the plant, or even just behind the phone camera that you're using. And again, you can experiment to see what works best, and what sort of brings the best bit of light to the plant. And crucially, you don't want that light source to be too close, because then you're kind of replicating the effects of the flash and you'll get shadows. So you need it to be close enough that you can see a difference, but yeah, don't hold it too close to the plant. You want to make the lighting as sort of natural as possible. So another really good thing you can do is adjust the exposure. Now this is a screenshot of my phone, which is an iPhone, but as far as I'm aware, other phones have this as well. They forgive me if they don't. Basically, it's a way of making sure the phone is taking a photo as you want it to take the photo, because often what happens is the phone will automatically correct the settings, and you'll be taking a photo of something that looks different to what you're actually, or the lighting will look different to how you're observing it. So if you just tap to focus on, in this case, the catkin on this hazel, then you get this yellow box popping up with the sunshine on the right. And if you just hold that sunshine and drag it up and down that yellow line, then it alters the exposure. And so you get this sort of lighter and darker effect. And you can just match that to what you're actually seeing. In most cases, you don't need to do this. This is only really applicable in a few situations, but it has really helped me in the past. So to show you where this might be useful, a few weeks ago, I went for a walk in the wood, and it was sort of getting towards the end of the day. So it was sort of approaching dusk and the light levels were much lower. And I walked over the stream, and along the banks of this stream, there's this amazing phenomenon where there's all this moss growing along the edges, which is really, really dark. But the tips of those bits of moss were just glowing this sort of golden green color. It was just amazing, and I wanted to take a photo of that. So I got my camera out, my phone out, and took this photo on the left. And now the phone just completely corrected the lighting, because it was dark and it kicked into action. It was like, right, we need to improve this. And it just completely removed the phenomenon I was observing. So just by tapping on it, dragging that sunshine down, it then produced this photo on the right here, which is exactly the same place, but this is what I could actually see, and the phenomenon that I was actually trying to take a photo of. So it can be really useful in some situations. So once you've got your lighting perfect, you've got your sun in the right place, you might have a torch out, you've got everything lit up perfectly. Obviously, you've now got to get the actual plant in focus. Arguably the most important thing about taking a photo of, taking a photo of anything, is the thing you want people to look at has to be in focus. So taking a photo with a phone can often be very difficult, as I'm sure many of you have experienced, because obviously phone cameras are, for some reason, are not designed for taking photos of little flowers. As infuriating as that is, they are designed predominantly for taking photos of people, faces, large animals like dogs and things, and landscapes. So I'm sure you've all experienced getting your phone out in front of a plant and the phone immediately goes, right, ignore this thing in the foreground. We want a photo of this beautiful background. And it can take ages to get the thing you actually want to focus on to get it in focus. So there are various ways you can deal with this. The most simple is just moving slightly further away from the plant. The phone can only focus so close. And actually, often the easiest thing is just to take a step back. But obviously, that makes the plant smaller within your image, so it's not necessarily the most useful thing. You can zoom in. Zooming in does obviously make the plant bigger. It means you can move slightly further away without reducing the size within the frame. But it's really important not to zoom in too much, because then you get slightly pixelated image, which particularly if you're trying to get the plant identified, can often obscure some detail that you need to tell one species from another. this is very much a case of seeing what works for you. So on my phone personally, I found that going up to a zoom of 1.5 times works really well, but I tend to not go over that because beyond that, things start getting a little bit too pixelated for my liking. But yeah, you can fiddle around with that with your own phone and see what works and see what doesn't, and just sort of test its capability to see how far you can zoom in. But the biggest tip I have for focusing is to use your finger. So, image on the left here. I'm sure this is a very familiar sight. Again, as I was describing before, you're trying to take a photo of a plant, and all the phone wants to do is focus on the background. So what you do is you trick the phone essentially by just put your finger next to the thing you want to focus on. Tap on your finger on the screen, and that will bring your finger into focus, and very handily the plant standing next to it. And at that stage, you just have to remove your finger and then take the photo. Now, this takes a little bit of practice because often when you remove your finger, the phone will just refocus on the background. So it can be a little bit fiddly, but once you get a bit of practice in, you can gain yourself a few seconds where the phone remains focused on your plant after you've taken your finger away, and then you can get a photo like this spindle twig on the right. Yeah, so it's a very, very useful way of sort of tricking the phone into thinking, oh, there's a bit of a human there, let's focus on that, and actually that brings the plant nicely into focus. So that's sort of my biggest tip for the foreground, is just using your finger to get things in focus. Cool. So that's the end of the foreground section. Is there anything anyone wants to ask about adjusting the lighting or focusing? I'll try my best.
Thank you, Leith. That was a brilliant start. And yes, of course, you've got lots of really brilliant questions. You've obviously got lots of people super keen here. Somebody has asked whether any plant species could possibly be identified by emitting specific rays of wavelength. So when you look at the photographs later, presumably.
As far as I'm aware, no, at least not in this country. I don't think there are going to be any species that are going to be identified on the color, this precise color. Obviously you get within species variation, so any subtle difference in say petal color is always going to be down to variation, really. So yeah, those sort of subtleties can be helpful in, I suppose, things like, I don't know, things like northern marsh orchids, for example, are a very subtle sort of purple, whereas something like a southern marsh orchid lacks some of the warmth or crimson color that the purple has in a northern marsh orchid. But there are lots of other factors that are used to tell those two species apart. And so actually, I think, yeah, when it comes to wavelengths of light and getting that color, obviously it's nice to have an accurate representation of color, but it's not the most important thing.
Thank you. So I've got another one here, actually relating to your last slide there. I noticed where you've focused in on your finger there, quite often the background will blur, and somebody's actually asking, when they focus on the plant and the background blurs, actually, is there a way to avoid that?
Avoiding the background blurring. So as you will see in the next section, I actually encourage having a blurry background. I don't know if there's a way of on a phone. The real way to do it is by limiting the amount of space between the plant and the background, because so the closer the background is to the plant, the more it will be in focus. I'm not sure if there's any specific way, if that's out of your control, how to do that. But yeah, again, this is a personal opinion. When you've got a plant in the foreground, I quite like having a blurry background, but I will talk about a little bit more about this in a minute.
Brilliant.
Yeah,
Thank you. And actually related to this, I've got a question. Have you got any advice when you're trying to take, which is quite often the case, taking a photograph of something that is greeny brown and the background is greeny brown, how you can separate those two?
So it entirely depends whether so if you're taking a photo purely to get it identified or submitting it to the NPMS and want to get those photos verified, the identification verified, then as someone has already suggested, using something to change the background is a really useful thing. So it could be a notebook, it could just be your hand, just shoving your hand behind it so that you get that color contrast. But in terms of if you want like a nice photo, I think, I mean, yeah, it's always going to be tricky. The commonest thing is when I'm trying to take photos of mosses and liverworts, which are obviously largely green, and they're very small, and the background is often green because there are other mosses and liverworts in the background. So actually this photo here, on the slide here, it's just trying to increase the distance between the plant in your foreground and the next thing in the background will just then blur that background, and hopefully if you get the plant in focus and the background blurry, then that will add some contrast, and it will enable the phone to more accurately pick up and focus on that plant. But yeah, it's always going to be tricky when the background is the same color as the foreground. So there are little things you can do, but yeah, it's always going to be a bit harder, and that is the same whether you've got a phone or a digital camera.
Thank you. Right, I'm super aware of the time. We've got absolute oodles of brilliant questions. I'm going to just pick another one or two, and then I'm going to save the rest until hopefully we can have a bit of a Q&A session at the end, just because I'm aware of the time. So just going down the list, somebody's mentioned that the camera turns their torch off on the phone automatically. Is there a workaround?
As far as I'm aware, no. So either if I'm out with someone else, I'll get someone else's phone to use the phone torch on that. If you know you're going out and not with anyone else, then just using like a small pocket torch would be my recommendation. But yeah, there's as far as I'm aware, there's no real way around that. It'd be more beneficial to have it separate from your phone anyway, because then you can move the angle of it to get it coming in from the side, which is often the best way to light the plant anyway.
It's a separate torch.
Yeah.
Somebody said this may be a bit premature. You may talk about this a little bit later, but you mentioned that plants don't move, and actually this isn't always the case if, for example, there's a breeze, and this can be a real tricky, big issue when you're trying to take photographs, particularly say in spring and autumn and winter. In fact, like now, have you got any tips for taking photos of plants in the breeze?
Yeah, so yeah, that is the one real thing, is that as soon as it gets windy, and again with phones, it doesn't make it easy. The two things that I generally recommend to people is firstly, if you can, without damaging the habitat, just place like a rucksack or something in between the direction of the wind and your plant, which particularly if it's a small plant will really, really help keep it still. But the other thing I get people to do is just hold the plant very gently, just slightly below where you're taking a photo, and that can often really, really help with wind as well. But just generally, that's something that which is just so out of our control. Yeah, the wind, unfortunately. But yeah, a well-placed rucksack or just gently holding the plant do tend to work quite well. Excellent. Right, we shall move on to the background then. So thinking about the depth of field and actually using the background to add something to your image. So the first thing is something which I find is the first thing I think about when I'm thinking about the background, is trying to remove any unnecessary distractions from your photo. So this image on the left here is one of Hart's Tongue Time Moss, and when you first look at it, you don't really necessarily even notice this plant in the foreground because the background is so busy. There are so many bits of grass, there are so many there's trees in the background, there are other plants around, and there's a lot going on, and a lot of it is the same color. So if you can, get an angle where the background is slightly cleaner. So in this image on the right here, I had to, this is on like a mossy log, and I sort of twisted the log around slightly to move away from a tree which was right behind this plant and was quite busy. Just moved it around and then created this sort of, I think there was a path there. So there was a bit of space. And behind it, you just got this really plain background. It's all kind of the same color, crucially a different color to the thing I was taking a photo of. And there's not much going on there. So your eye is immediately drawn to the foreground with the plant that's in focus. Again, not always possible to do that. Not always possible to get an angle where there is a clean background, but if you can, it's a really, really good thing to do. So talking about blurry backgrounds, I quite like a blurry background because it just draws the eye immediately to the thing you're talking about or want people to look at. And the way you achieve this is just by increasing the distance between the plant in the foreground and whatever is in your background. So as a few examples with these holly leaves, I actually just picked the holly leaves, walked about 5 to 10 meters away from the holly tree, which you can see in the background there, created that space, which then just blurs the background and has that sort of pinpoint focus on the leaves in the foreground. Again, this is just a mossy branch, picture 2 here, where, again, similarly to the moss at the end, behind me, I've got a very busy environment, but actually turning around, I had that space to create that blurry background. And again, with the round-headed rampion, the purple one, very busy chalk grassland environment, lots of plants growing, but because it was on a slope, by turning around the other way, that opened up that space into the valley and created a nice blurred background. Obviously, if you do want the background to be less blurry, then it's simply the opposite. Try and get into a place where there's less distance between the plant and the background. But one of my favorite things to do when creating the background of a photo is to actually use it. You know, it's fine trying to get rid of it in a sense in order to focus on the plant, but if you can use it as well, then that's really, really beneficial. So as I said, I use a lot of my photos to tell stories on social media. So on the left here, we've got a moss. I'm currently doing this thing on social media, trying to teach people how to identify very common mosses. And so I took this photo to try and capture some of the habitat in the background, so that people going out to try and find this moss sort of get an idea of where to look. Now, obviously, there's text attached to these images, but I really like trying to capture as much information within that single photograph as possible to try and grab people's attention. Then we just got nice things again based on the habitat and where you might find these things. So the second photo here is pelletry on the wall, which grows in urban environments. So this was just on the bank of the River Thames, and there's some really nice sort of Vauxhall London buildings in the background, which immediately tells you exactly the kind of environment it likes to grow in. Then we got the purple saxifrage, big bright color on the left there, immediately tells you about the plant, you know, what the plant looks like. But then you've got the information that it grows up on these sort of crags with that sort of depth into the valley in the background. And then on the right here, this lovely plant, Danish scurvy grass, which is a plant which is a coastal plant generally, but it's colonized inland along road verges where they like spray sort of salts and stuff during the winter. And so actually in telling the story, I wanted to capture the road in the background, and I spent ages waiting for this a one car to go past, which was kind of the same color as the flowers themselves. So that it wasn't too distracting. I didn't want like a red car in the background, but it sort of subtly adds to the image, I think, because it, yeah, just gives you a bit of information that leads you into that story, and gives you, like, as I say at the bottom here, just a different layer in the photo, a different point of focus, even though it is blurry, that just adds to that image and the habitat and learning more about the plant. So this is something which personally doesn't really bother me too much, but it's something I often get people mentioning to me, is trying to keep a natural horizon. So In the case where you do have a horizon in your photo, obviously, on the left here, we've got a photo where the horizon is wonky. So I've just sort of tilted the plant, and you can see like the clouds are going down diagonally and the trees are all leaning to the right. So just if you are looking at the background, it just looks slightly odd. So in the middle here, I just then straightened it so that the horizon was straight. And that looks, if you're, looking at it critically, that just looks a bit cleaner. But if you are on a hill, it's important to keep the horizon natural. So in this case, on the right here, it's still slanted, but all the trees are the right way up and everything. So it still looks natural. Again, a subtle thing, but can just be, make your image a bit nicer. But my biggest tip with this is to capture the plant from plant height rather than head height. So obviously when you're taking a photo of a small plant, your phone, no matter how close you get to the ground, the lens is going to be above the plant. And so you'll take an image like this on the right, which is fine. There's nothing wrong with it. It gives a nice indication of the habitat and things. But the thing which makes most difference, I think, for me personally, when taking photos of plants that are low to the ground, is to simply just switch the phone around so that the lens is now as close to the ground as it can possibly be with the phone upside down. And actually that just opens up the world of plants, I find. So this image here on the right, you can see how suddenly the viewer is down at plant height. It's experiencing the world from the sort of viewpoint of this plant, if you like. And it just captures more of the drama, and it makes it more relatable because you're down there with it. And just produces, I think, much, much nicer images when you're sort of at plant height rather than looking down on something. So that's just a really simple thing that you can do to capture the plant from a different angle. And obviously when it's a small plant, we're not necessarily ever going to see, unless you get right down on the ground, you're never going to see the plant from this angle. So it's just a nice way of changing it up a little bit. So any questions about the background and using the background to show the habitat?
Okay, so I've got a great question here. Somebody's asked actually before, but it relates now. Any tips for trying to get the right exposure for snow? So very apt at the moment. So when you're trying to take a picture, for example, of a plant emerging for the snow, do you have any tips for exposure there?
Yeah, no, that can be tricky. I was out this morning in the frost and I'm trying to think what I was doing to deal with the sort of white. We had like a hoarfrost, so it was effectively snow. The only thing I can think of that I do is using the sort of early morning light when the light's coming in at an angle rather than directly. You can then get that sort of nice glow around. I was taking photos of like dead umbellifer flower heads, so hogweed and things, and yeah, just getting a sort of it backlit with the sun works quite nice. But yeah, I don't know, I think it would be that would sort of be a case by case situation.
Heading out and trial and error, you're having a go.
Yeah, just sorry, that's not very helpful. But,
a couple of people asked, do you ever use a tripod?
Not with a phone, no. Obviously, if you can get small tripods which you can stick your phone on. I've used them for recording videos, but generally when I'm taking photos, it's just two hands rather than one hand is always going to help sort of stop things shaking around. But yeah, you can get these small, I don't know, 15 centimeter tall tripods, which are really good for stopping yourself shaking around.
It depends on the height of the plant possible, but if you've got something that you're down on the ground on your tummy, yes, it can be quite tricky. Okay, so somebody's asked here, when getting down to the plant level, quite often you can get quite a lot of sky with quite a strong contrast. Is there any way or any tips you have to get around this? For example, if a plant is just that little bit taller than that sundew there on that slide.
So yes, so I would always recommend keeping the top of the plants, and using the sundew as an example. I deliberately didn't go down so low that the sundew leaf itself was above the horizon, because as you say, as soon as that goes into the sky, as it were, then suddenly most of the time you'll lose quite a lot of detail. So if you just position it so that it's just below the horizon, and focus on it there, then well, okay, so there are two ways of doing it. Either you can keep it just below the horizon and focus on the plant, but that often washes out the sky in the background. But that's one way of doing it. The other way is to, again, just keep it below the horizon, but don't focus on the plant. Let the phone focus on the plant itself. And in a lot of cases, that will then keep the color in the sky in the background rather than just washing that out entirely. Again, trial and error required, but that's my best tip for that one.
That's really helpful, thank you. And one last one just for this section. A few people have asked for any tips dealing with plants growing in, say, for example, grass or amongst other vegetation. Somebody's mentioned, say, a busy meadow scene, for example, which can distract from the plant that you're particularly interested in.
Yes, yeah, very tricky to deal with. So again, if you're just trying to identify the plant, then I would just recommend getting a notebook or a hand or something, putting it behind to make sure that you can focus on and get those details from that plant. But if you're trying to take a photo, like a nicer photo, it is incredibly difficult to sort of blur out the distractions in the background. The only tip I really have is to just try all the angles. Often you'll get a little break in the background, maybe where the grass is slightly shorter or the different species of plants, so the sward is slightly shorter, and you can then get a bit of sky at the top with fewer distractions in the background. But yeah, other than moving around and trying all the angles, I've never yet found anything that particularly works in a wildflower meadow sort of situation.
Great, thank you.
Cool. So yes, next is bringing together the foreground and the background and composing a really nice photo. So as I said, this is something which is sort of relevant whether using a phone or a digital camera. But the first thing to say is the sort of classic, just putting your plant in the middle of the photo is fine. It works, it makes a nice photo. But there are ways of making your image more interesting. So yeah, so this plant here, this fir club moss, I took this photo with it in the middle. I then just moved around 45 degrees and changed where I put the plant slightly and created this photo, which I think is much nicer. And I've used a method which is sort of one of the first things you come across if you start looking up, how to take photographs. It's called the rule of thirds. And it's something which I spent years sort of applying to my photos before I'd sort of heard of it formally written down. But it's something which you sort of get into a habit of doing in the way you arrange your photo. So the rough idea is to get the foreground, the midground, and the background split equally within the image. So if you just imagine, if you get down with, on the ground with your phone and get the plant within the screen, and imagine. You can either imagine a 3x3 grid overlying the frame, or in many cases on phones, you can actually get the phone to put this over your image. Then you split, so the foreground, so you've got the ground in the foreground where the base of the plant is your bottom third. The midground here is the mountains and that little body of water, so that goes in the middle third. And then the top third is the sky and the clouds. So it roughly fits into those three. You then position the plant at one of the four intersections. Yeah, just 1, 2, 3, 4 in those sort of corners. I've popped it in the bottom left there, and it just means that you let a little bit more space for other information in the rest of the photo, and while drawing the viewer's eye to that plant in the foreground. So you can do this, in all sorts of situations. So here's a yellow water lily. And again, I just, in my head, overlaying that grid, popped the sky in the top third there. And in this case, put the plant between those 2 points. And again, just balancing your image with that negative space. Negative space is just part of the image that isn't the thing you're focused on. There's nothing negative about it, but yeah, that's just what it's called. So drawing your viewer's eye to the thing you want to focus on. The rule of thirds works, but you don't have to stick with it. So in this case, as I said, I've just popped the flower there in the middle rather than towards the right. I'm still using, I'm still splitting the image into thirds with a third sky and 2/3 habitat. But yeah, in this case, just putting the flower in the middle. So it's really just a case of experimenting, but it is just a nice way. The rule of thirds is a nice way of just sort of tidying up your image, making it really clean. And it means there's a nice balance between what you're focused on and everything else going on that might be going on in the background. So another question you might want to ask is, do I take a photo portrait or landscape? So ideally you want to sort of fill the frame of the image with the plant that you're taking a photo of. And portrait is often best because the plant is obviously, in almost all cases, is taller than it is wide. So a couple of examples of this, you got meadow saffron here. So I wanted to capture the petals at the top and all these flower tubes which go down into the ground. So I just got down low on the ground, I turned my phone upside down, and then these whole things just fill the image. Whereas if that had been horizontal, you'd have cut off those stems, or it would fill very little of the actual image. Similarly, if you've got a plant with a flower spike, where you've got like one stem and then a whole inflorescence of flowers, like this Irish lady's tresses, then obviously that's a lot taller than it is wide. And so portrait is always, in my opinion, going to be best for a plant like that, unless you're trying to capture the habitat as well, in which case you might go landscape and position the plant to one side, and then you've got the habitat in the background as well. So sometimes I think with plants that creep along the ground, like this oyster plant, I think landscape is best. And as I said, when you're getting plants in situ, trying to capture that habitat as well, just positioning your plant in focus off to the left or off to the right in a landscape photo then creates, you know, a lot of that space for you to see what kind of place it grows in. It is subjective though, of course. It's entirely up to you what you think works best. In many cases, like this one here, I think it doesn't really matter. So here, I think if I had to choose, I'd go for the landscape one with the moss campion in the bottom, filling up that bottom third, and then the top 2/3 are the habitat with the mountains behind. But actually this portrait one on the right, I think works really well as well. Again, the bottom third is the flowers and then the top 2/3 the habitat. But yeah, in this case, I don't think it really matters. So yeah, again, it's just how it feels. Generally portrait is better, but sometimes you can utilize landscape as well. Now, the other thing that I like to do is to utilize the equipment that I have while botanizing in the photos in order to capture the really, really, really tiny things. So I often use my hand lens, which is like #1 piece of botanical equipment, to add to an image. So with the flowers like pearlworts like these, they are so tiny, sometimes like the size of a pinhead, that if you take a photo close up of the flower, you get no information about the habitat. It can often look slightly out of focus because it's very difficult to focus on something so small. So what I like to do is just get my hand lens, get the lens itself is not in focus, but actually the individual flower you're magnifying is, and it just makes it that bit bigger while giving you again information about the place where it lives. And then in the case of this image on the right here, I just quite like, you know, you've got your rectangular frame of the image, and then you've just got that big circle in the middle, and then the sort of same circular flower bang in the middle. So again, this is just something I've done in the last year or so, just experimenting, taking photos of tiny things with my hand lens. But I find it's quite a nice, interesting way to view these tiny plants. Now, with plants that are really small or with plants that are very narrow, what I really like to do in order to fill the frame is to use multiples. So as we can see here, you've got 2 violets. I'll often spend ages wandering around a population of plants trying to find 2 that are very close together like this, just because it fills more of the frame, adds more to the image. In the middle here, these are our 3 commonest heather species, which are really, really common around the country. And I wanted to show people the differences between them. So yeah, I've just lined those up, all 3. Again, individually, it wouldn't necessarily look the same because they're very narrow, but 3 of them together fill that frame. And the same goes with these winter twigs on the right. Obviously even narrower in these cases. But yeah, just a way to fill that frame by using multiples. And of course, that way you can it's really nice having 2 of the same thing, or 3 of the same thing, as is the case with these violets. But what's also really nice is having multiples of sort of things which look exactly the same but completely different at the same time, like these winter twigs. So if you can find in populations pairs of things, triplets of things growing next to each other, I personally think that makes a really nice photo. It might take you another 5-10 minutes of wandering around trying to find 2 that are next to each other, but I do find it is worth it. Any questions about image composition?
Brilliant, thank you. Yes, there's lots and lots of questions. Somebody's asked they'd love a recommendation for a hand lens. Quite a few people have used them, but not found out what magnification. So if not specific hand lens, what magnification would you suggest?
So yes, there are lots and lots of different brands. But the important thing is, so the most basic hand lens you get, like the one that I've used most of my life, is a 10 times magnification hand lens, and that's like your most standard one, and you can get those very, very cheaply. And the one that I currently use, which was in those photos back there, was at 15 times magnification, 1.5, which is slightly better. I think actually for taking photos, I would prefer to have a 10 times lens. So I'm considering getting a 10 times lens for taking those photos, because then you just get a little bit more around the image. You're slightly less zoomed in. But yeah, I mean, I think my one was about it was somewhere between 10 and 20 pounds for a 15 times lens, but 10 times lens are they're much cheaper, so generally under 10 pounds, I think.
Right, thank you. And someone's noted that actually quite small white flowers can be the hardest to focus in the light. So do you have any particular tips for white, or even perhaps maybe pale yellow flowers?
The biggest tip would be to aim for like overcast skies. Now, obviously, if you're out on a walk and you just happen to find something and it's sunny, then that's more tricky. You can't necessarily go back when it's a cloudy day. But yeah, generally with things like yellows and whites, and actually blue flowers as well, although they're slightly less usual, are difficult. Often when you get direct sunlight on those plants, they just sort of wash out and all the details disappear. Yeah, so if you can get it and the background in the shade, that would help. Or if you're able to go back on an overcast day, then that's definitely optimal.
Brilliant, thank you. So I'm going to say let's move on to the next section, but again, just say if we haven't got to your question yet, hopefully if anybody's happy to stick around for 10 minutes, we'll try and get through some more questions at the end. Thanks.
Right. So yeah, a little bit on macro photography. So as I've already mentioned, the hand lens is a relatively cheap piece of equipment, but you can get one of these clip-on sort of macro lenses to clip onto your phone, which are even cheaper again. So I'll talk about using both of those. So yeah, obviously plants are often way too small for phone cameras to really handle, and using this extra little lens can open up whole new worlds of beauty and things. All of these photos here were taken either with my hand lens or with this little clip-on lens, and you can get some really nice photos using these very cheap pieces of equipment. from everything from mosses and liverworts all the way through to flowering plants. Now, the clip-on macro lens just opens up an entire world. So it's this really little thing. They all look very slightly different, but this is just the one that I have. And you literally, it's like a clothes peg. You just clip it onto the outside of your phone over your camera lens. And I think these ones are a 10 times magnification. And yeah, they just completely change what's on your phone screen. And again, you can just move it around. So this image on the right here, in order to get when I turn the phone upside down, in order to get it close to the ground, I've just clipped on the side. They're really cheap. You can get them for sort of £3. If you just search on the internet for clip-on macro lens, there are loads and loads of them available. Now, yes, I've also used my hand lens for this. It is more fiddly. So these images here, you've got this little filmy fern, which you can see with my finger there is pretty tiny, but just popping my hand lens in front of it and the phone right up close to that, the phone lens right up close to the hand lens, then you can get images like this one on the right here. It is quite fiddly because obviously when you've got a clip-on lens, when you move, both the lens and the phone are moving. Whereas if you're just using your hand lens, you've got the lens in one hand and the phone in the other. And actually you've then got two moving parts. And so it is a bit more tricky to get things in focus. But when you do, I find they're often slightly better quality just because the lens itself is a slightly better quality lens. But yeah, as this is such a go-to, very cheap piece of botanical equipment, I find it really, really amazing to just utilize that in taking photos as well. The really, really important thing, whether you're using a hand lens or a macro lens when you're taking photos, is to hold it parallel with the plant in order to get everything in focus. So on the left here is how it works best. So when it's parallel, you get all of this blue box on the left here. You get all that bit of the twig in focus. Whereas if you angle it, like on the right here, only the top left of that blue box is the bit in focus. So yeah, if the plant is out of focus, then just making sure the lens is parallel with the plant will bring things into focus. It's also important to make sure you're actually close enough to the plant. These lenses are macro lenses, so they work by you have to get really, really close, like within a centimeter or so, often, just to get things in focus. I found when I first got one of these, I was surprised by how close I had to get in order for things to come into focus. So that's a very brief section, but if there are any questions on, clip-on lenses or hand lenses.
No, I think looking at the time, I think let's keep going, and we'll go for the questions at the end. Thank you.
Ooh, in which case, briefly then, a bit about photos for ID. So when you're trying to identify a plant, it's very much about what you photograph and not how you photograph it. So image composition just doesn't matter when it comes to these photos. It's focus and getting enough contrast between the plant in the foreground and the background in order to be able to identify and pick out key features. So as has already been mentioned, if you use something, whether it's a piece of black cloth, I don't know, a t-shirt, or if you position someone else behind to get some sort of plain clothing in the background, or a notebook or a hand, just so that it provides a real contrast between the tiny thing you're trying to take a photo of and the background, you can then really pick out those features. Including something for scale is a really useful thing. So this image on the left here, it's really nice, but it's very hard to tell how big that plant is. So by just including a finger in this case, I sort of gave some kind of scale to show how big the plant is. Obviously, it's much more useful if you're using something like a 20p piece, because obviously all 20p's are the same size, whereas fingers vary in size. But in this case, I just use that to give a rough idea. But for plant ID, if you do have a coin, that's incredibly useful, because then you can tell exactly how big the plant is. So just literally put that in the photo next to the plant and get both in focus, and then you can tell how big something is. Now, the main thing with photographing for ID is to get photos of lots of different parts of the plant. I often get sent photos, like an individual photo of a plant, and being asked, what is this? And unfortunately, I'm often not able to say, because the key bit to distinguish two different species is not actually in the photo. So in the case of this winter tree that I found the other day, it's nice to have a picture of the whole tree if possible. Obviously, if you're in a wood, then that becomes difficult. But if you can get a silhouette of the tree, that's very useful. But a close-up of the bark, a twig to see how the buds are arranged, a close-up of the buds, and then any other details that you might have. So in this case, there were a load of dead leaves on the floor. But yeah, anything else that you can notice about the tree is very useful. When it comes to flowering plants in the summer, unfortunately, I don't have a set of photos that I can exhibit this with. I spent ages trying to find some, but I don't have photos of different parts of the same plant to show you. But this is a little checklist that you can use. So to get a photo of the whole plant itself in its setting, and a photo just generally of the surrounding habitat can be really useful in pinning down one species or another. The leaves, crucially, both the upper leaves and the lower leaves are really useful. On a lot of plants, the upper and lower leaves can be slightly different, particularly the taller plants. And so it's really useful to have images of both the upper and lower leaves. Similarly with the stem, and again, this applies more with slightly taller plants perhaps, but it can be really useful to have upper and lower stems. In some cases, there are species that you distinguish by looking at whether the lower stem is hairy or not. And so, yeah, obviously having photos of both the lower and the upper stem are really, really useful. Getting an image of the entire inflorescence. So for example, this hawkweed here, all of those inflorescences, it's really, really useful to have those all in one image. But then if you can get individual flowers as well, that's really useful. If you're looking at something like, I don't know, like a geranium that generally has quite a flat top, if you're looking down on the flower, you can just see the petals. So that's a useful view of the petals. But then if you take an image as well from the side of the flower, then you can see the sepals and things below that flower as well as the petals. So basically, if in doubt, I mean, you can use this checklist, of course, but if in doubt, just take pictures of all the different parts of the plant that you can think of. It might seem like overkill. In most cases, it's not needed, but it's better to be safe than sorry. And actually having 2, 3, 4, 5 images of a plant from different angles of different parts of the plant is so useful, not only for people like me trying to help identify plants, but also for at the NPMS, I know that when they get records submitted with photos, they need to verify identifications, and they can't then use that record if they can't tell if the plant has been accurately identified. So it's really useful to have a good range of different photos of different parts of the plant. Just briefly to finish up then, a little bit about good practice as photographers. This is all very sort of common sense, but I did think I'd mention it, as it's very easy to get caught up in the excitement of finding a nice plant and taking photos of it. Yeah, so just to basically be aware of your surroundings when you're taking photos. Just very briefly on gardening. So gardening refers to picking other plants to create like a cleaner photo, a cleaner background. I really wouldn't recommend it. It's something that when I was a kid, I used to do a little bit of, bits of grass here and there. But now I try to just leave it as natural as it comes. A real no-no is like picking, live other plants, because, you could be damaging all sorts of different things. In this photo on the right here, the one thing I could have done was remove some of these sort of dead straw-like bits of grass. I haven't in this case, but occasionally I'll move dead bits of last year's grass. But the one thing there is just to make sure, if you do that, to make sure you're not uprooting anything and not damaging any other plants in the surrounding area. So ways you can get around it. is simply by moving angle. So if you've got a load of grass around the plant you're I don't know, wildflower you're looking at, just by moving around, you can often get a much cleaner image without actually picking anything. You can actually incorporate the surrounding sward into your photo, so you can get these images where there's just like a lot of green, say, around with the grass going around something, and then there's just single bright pink flower. I don't know, of something like common vetch in a grassland. So actually you've got this sort of mystery with all this green sort of coming in and out of focus throughout the image, and then this one small flower, pink flower, very contrasting colors, with the surrounding vegetation. Or what I like to do is basically take anything I have with me that's light, so it might be a notebook or a hand lens or a lunchbox or something, and just weigh down bits of vegetation that are surrounding and getting in the way. And then once you've done taking photos, you can just remove the notebook or whatever, and the plants will just spring back again. I'll often use other plants as well. So I might hook, if there's like a bramble coming across, I might hook the bramble around, a twig branch or something. And yeah, it'll just stay there, and then I'll just take it off again once I've taken my photo. And then just a little bit on trampling. I mean, again, it's common sense stating the obvious, but yeah, do be careful when you're moving through sensitive habitats, particularly places like ancient woodlands and things where bluebells can get really, really damaged just by treading on them. And they can't sort of produce bluebells next year because they don't have enough energy because they haven't been able to photosynthesize. If you can avoid lying down, that's always a good thing to avoid, because obviously you're damaging more things if you're lying down. So crouching is always optimal in that situation. And as I said earlier, if it is windy, then do place a backpack in the way, but just be careful of what you're placing it on. Now, just a few final things. Practice on really, really common things that you see every day, so that when you do find that plant you've been wanting to see for years, you're well prepared to know exactly how to take the best possible photo with your phone. If you're planning on going out for a long day of taking photos, then I would recommend, if you have one, taking a battery pack. The number of times I've been out in the middle of the day and I've just found this amazing plant and my phone dies because I've taken so many photos already. It's been so infuriating. So if you do have a battery pack, I would recommend taking one of those along. The really important thing is your individual phone will have its own quirks, its own limitations, and so by practicing, get to know the capabilities of your own phone. Obviously I have a very specific model of phone, and so each camera and each model will be slightly different. So just get to know how your phone performs best. And yeah, again, when you find that plant you've been wanting to look for, wanting to see for ages, then hopefully you can get a nice photo of it. And finally, just be patient. If you have the time, wait for that cloud to pass or that cloud to come in front of the sun, depending on what you think works best. Just this morning I was out, as I said, in the hoarfrost, and I found a really nice teasel which was covered in frost, and it took some fairly okay photos, but I then spent about 20 minutes just stood there waiting for the sun to come up, so that it was sort of lighted up, and took a much nicer photo with the sun coming in. So if you do have time, being patient can make your image much better. So yeah, any questions on that section, or any questions overall? I'm very happy to try and answer some more.
Brilliant. Thank you, Leif. Well, I'm afraid I think it's only about a few minutes before we're going to be booted out to Zoom, but thank you so much. You've given us so many brilliant tips there, and thank you so much for everybody that's provided some great questions. I think we've actually managed to get through the vast majority. I'm terribly sorry if there's any that we haven't quite managed to. If there's anything that's particularly burning, please do contact me at support@npms.org.uk. Most people saying thank you very much, Leif. I'm going to pick one question to finish us off with, if that's okay.
Of course.
Just because I thought this was quite a nice one to finish on, please, because I'm leaving feeling quite inspired, and I think a lot of people are. Somebody said there's some amazing plants here, and do you have a target list of plants that you go out and look for? Because we're interested in sort of that fieldwork strategy. How do you plan? I thought that was a nice finishing question now that we've all got the bug to go out and look.
And sorry, say that again, but are there any plants that I won't specifically
No,
search
sorry,
for?
you've got some brilliant photos. Do you have a strategy when you're going out, sort of almost a
Oh,
list of how you're going to
I
go out and,
see.
and find those plants that you want to take a photo of?
That is an excellent question. I suppose I do. I very rarely these days go out with a very specific plant that I want to find. Usually now I just go for a walk and see what I find. But yeah, I mean, I will look for things that I've never seen before, obviously, but I will look for things which I see very regularly and often just ignore because they're very common. I quite like having that as a focus of a walk, is trying to take really nice photos of the really common things, because I recently had to produce a load of photos for something and realized that I actually have very few photos of really, really common things. And so, yeah, one of the things I like to do is try to take nice images of the really common plants, because they're things which everyone see all around, you know, on a day-to-day basis. And my main motivation is getting people interested in plants. So if I can get people connected to the really common things through, you know, taking nice photos, then that's only going to be a good thing.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. And definitely, I'm reading all of these lovely comments with lots of people feeling very inspired. So I think you've done very much what you set out to do there. I think there's lots of people going to be heading out with their phones now.
Brilliant. Well, if anyone has any other questions for me, you can also get in touch via social media, Instagram and Twitter. And yeah, basically just say, go have fun, enjoy it. And it's always nice to see people's photos. So do, yeah, get in touch and share them, and submit them as records for the NPMS as well.
Yes, brilliant. Yeah, definitely. It would be lovely to carry on this conversation, whether email, online, you know, on Twitter, Instagram. Do share your photos. As Leif has said, we love to see what you're seeing out in the field, and we can definitely still keep learning from each other. We've got some great so many amazing tips from you, Leif, but I've also been getting quite a few brilliant tips from people in the comments as well. So let's carry on helping each other basically with these great tips online. Fab. Leif has very helpfully put up here a bunch of links, both the NPMS website, but also how to contact himself and us. And I think we're going to have to leave it there now. So thank you ever so much, everybody, for joining us. Brilliant. Thank you, Leif.
Thank you. Thank you very much for coming, for having me.
Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye.